Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll get started. My name is Mike Clare. I am the Associate Director for Public Policy at the Harris Center here at Memorial University. Delighted to be your host here today. Welcome to the session where we're going to talk about barriers to gender equity in the STEM occupation. So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. So I want to welcome those of you who are here with me in the McCann Center on the St. John's campus of Memorial. And we have several people watching online as well. So welcome, everybody. The participation of women in STEM occupations remains low, despite several decades of attention from policymakers, industry, and educational institutions. In fact, I recall back in 2011, the Harris Center did a major international conference on women to encourage more women to work in the oil and gas industry. So that was a major event. But despite that, in Canada, between 1991 and 2011, a 20-year period, women accounted for 75% of the growth in the number of workers in university-level, non-scientific occupations. So 75% growth, university-level, non-scientific occupations, but only 27% in scientific occupations. And in 2013, at the peak of the petroleum and mining boom, women accounted for less than 10% of skilled trades registrations in fields such as welding, automotive repair, and machinists. That's kind of discouraging compared to all of the effort that has been put into it. In light of the apparent discontinuity between effort and outcomes, this presentation today will highlight some of the reasons why this low rate of participation has persisted. We'll also look at the efficacy of current policies and regulations with the goal of increasing the participation of women in STEM occupations. So to give our speaker a sense of who's in the room with us, why don't we just quickly go around the room, and we'll start with the people online. I'll ask Taylor to read out who's watching online.
Online we have Dr. Kara Arnold, Lisa Birmingham, and Tracy Rydick.
And
I'm Carolyn Emerson from Wisenell, and I've worked probably for 40 years in this area.
Gloria Montano, also with Wisenell and the Women in Science, Engineering, Trades, and Technology Center, which is a national organization. And I'm maybe 10 years short of what Caroline's working.
Mark Shrimpton with Stantec Consulting.
I'm Olivia Vila. I'm a master's student in the geography department.
I'm Susan Arscott, program developer at the Gardner Center in the Faculty of Business.
Jennifer.
Jennifer McVeigh with the Gardner Center.
Kieran McIsaac, Office of Student Recruitment and the University Committee on Employment Equity and Diversity.
Deanne Howlett with YWCA St. John's. Dana Aylward with Provincial Advisory Council on the Status of Women.
Linda Ross, the Provincial Advisory Council on Status of Women.
And Judith Lavas on Provincial Advisory Council on the Status of Women.
Phil Hellwig, semi-retired civil licensed engineer, elder statesman.
Taylor?
Taylor Stocks, the Harris Center.
And I'll introduce you. So let me outline how we're going to work today. We're going to start with about a 30 to 40-minute presentation by our speaker, and after that we'll engage in a Q&A discussion with you guys. If you are watching online, there's a little text box that you can write your question or your comment, and Taylor will read it out for us. For those of you who are in the room here, you'll see microphones on the ceiling. Just speak clearly so that the people online can hear. We're going to be recording this session for future reference. We just archive the presentation portion and not the discussion portion. We follow Chatham House rules, so we hope that you will not go outside and attribute comments to people that are made inside this room. We're also going to upload the PowerPoint presentation as well as the video so that you can refer to it, and that will prevent you from taking copious notes here today. We're going to finish at 1:30 Newfoundland time, and if you need to leave early, you'll see an evaluation form in front of you. Please, we'd appreciate it if you take the time to fill it out if you need to leave early. And I think that's all the housekeeping items that I have. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dana Feltham is an MBA candidate at Memorial University with 15 years of experience in the research and analysis of socioeconomic issues in natural resource industries. As a socio-economic analyst with Stantec, Dana was directly involved in the development and implementation of the Hebron Benefits Plan and the Right Rose Diversity Plan, as well as the assessment of major natural resource projects across Canada. She's also worked as a policy analyst with NOIA and was responsible for the management of the Petroleum Industry Human Resources Committee and internal policy committees related to human resources and industrial benefits. So please join me in welcoming Dana Coughlin to the podium.
I'm just going to stopwatch here so that I don't babble too long, which I have a tendency to do. First of all, I want to thank Mike and the Harris Center and everyone today, Taylor and Jennifer, for your support in getting this together over the past couple of weeks, including printing off my presentation for me this morning after my printer died at home. I'm guessing I just do that. There we go. So as for a brief agenda, so who am I? As Mike gave a bit of an introduction there. So my MBA right now is almost done, thankfully. My focus has been corporate social responsibility, gender equity. I'd like to thank Dr. Arnold, who is online. She was my supervisor for the paper that led to this. I'm also going to single out Mark Shrimpton, who has been my mentor for many, many years on this and other issues. I've been working on gender diversity for a very long time, since I joined NOIA in 2003, and it was always sort of top of mind for that organization. For CAF, I have done some work that they've been involved in. For Mark, White Rose, many of the operators in the oil and gas industry, it is a topic that has received a lot of attention and a lot of effort. So briefly, I'm just going to provide an introduction. After that, I'm going to look at the key themes and outcomes from my initial body of research. And then the important part of today, for me anyway, which is ways forward and the discussions and questions. This is the first part of what I intend to be a two-part study. This part is very much literature review based, and I want to bring that forward into trying to look more into some of the issues that I address here. So again, it was a thematic literature search. I wanted to identify the really key themes that were in the literature, which really spans decades as to what's going on and why this is happening. The key research question, which was already alluded to, was why have policies and programs that have been intended to increase gender equity in STEM occupations met with limited success? Carolyn noted she's been working on this for 30 or 40 years. I know Mark and others were involved in a Women in Oil and Gas session in the 80s, which had an anniversary version of the conference in 2011. This has been a long-term effort for many, many people, and that involves education, government, industry. It's a very, very broad-based advocacy goal. So Mike alluded to some of these numbers in his introduction. There's been persistently low participation. The proportion of women in scientific occupations went from 18% in 1991 to 23% in 2011. That number is also skewed a little bit by participation in some of the biological sciences, where women's participation tends to be a bit higher. So I think that's very important to note. Another thing to note here is that employment in these fields in Canada actually doubled during this time. It went from approximately 300,000 to 600,000. Yet the participation of women only increased by a relatively small amount. My notes are my security blanket. My study was international in focus. It was the developed world. There's a lot of literature on this coming from Australia, the UK, Canada, and Newfoundland as well. Newfoundland is an area that has put a lot of attention in this area. So just to bring it down to a local level, I've highlighted some of the numbers here from Memorial University. These come from Mons Center for Institutional Analysis. And you can look at the statistics. The percentage of women university graduates between 2003 and 2015 has remained fairly static. Interestingly, the two peaks, 25% and 28%, are a decade apart. And in between there, we have 18%, 19%. So, like I said, it's been relatively static. That's just to frame it on a bit of a local level. So my study really identified three key themes. One is broad structural barriers that are preventing women's participation. This includes really social, things that are deeply ingrained into our social fabric, gender policies, family dynamics, retention in these industries, and educational structures within these industries, the apprenticeship system, for example. Below that, and I should say these next two themes, they relate to the structural barriers, but they are dominant enough on their own that I think they needed to be pulled out. And that is doing gender and the idea of critical mass. So it's not clear from the literature whether or not the failure to address structural issues is due to a lack of awareness. There seems to be some evidence that superficial policies can address deep-rooted issues. For example, I did in my study, I found an article 2013 from the Canadian Mining Journal that suggested that having managers as champions of gender equity was all that was needed. Now this is the key. It's having managers who are driving it. That's important. You cannot underestimate the importance of that, but it does not address the deeper structural problems that exist. I'd also like to note that there are direct economic consequences for women as a result of these barriers. Women are 47% of the workforce in Canada as of 2016. Incomes are substantially lower. Women tend to be focused in services. There is healthcare. Women play a substantial role there. And also part-time and temporary jobs. And as we know from locally, the engineering and trade sectors and other science and math occupations tend to be higher paid. So the result is a substantial economic impact for women. So in terms of structural barriers, there has been, or that I noted in the literature, what they call an entrenched masculine culture. The imagery surrounding these sort of occupations are dominantly strong young white men. That is what you see in literature. That is the imagery that dominates these areas. There was a report done quite a while ago by Bobby Boland, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, at a snail's pace. One of the things that highlighted was that people think that gender equity programs, when all things being equal, the gender equity program will come into place. Unfortunately, you never quite get to that all things being equal part because of the deeply ingrained structural barriers that are there. And this is directly related to overall assumptions of women's employability, which begin to affect the women themselves. Women see themselves as being less employable in these fields. So within the structural barriers, there are themselves some clear themes. One is that gender equity is an accepted institutional imperative. This is very important. Everyone accepts gender equity is a part of doing business. I've read a study from 1996 that I think a couple of people in this room participated in on women's employment on the Hibernia project. And some of the stories that emerged from that study are absolutely gross, for want of a better word. I do not think that would, with the possible exception of the Spaniards Bay Fire Department, be allowed to persist today. There are respectful workplace programs. There are, broader gender equity programs themselves. Secondly, there is open resistance and hostility to the fact that this remains a problem, and that exists both among men and women. This is not the reason why we have a lack of participation. Okay, what is it? And the hostility that is there is in the literature. There are several studies that are very deeply qualitative based, a lot of interviews with women in these positions. They're adamant that this has nothing to do with a lack of participation. And those bottom two are linked. The denial coinciding with the hostility. This is called in the literature the politics of ignorance. It's referred to, and there's this invisible barrier, I guess is, for want of a better word, that women lack the authoritativeness and the knowledge and the capability and the capacity to do these jobs. So those are the three very broadly structural barriers that are faced. And this is the part of what I've done that really grabbed me the most, is this concept of doing gender. There was a 1987 article by Candace West and John Zimmerman. The article itself is called Doing Gender. And it is a seminal work in gender and gender relationships in the workplace. And the concept is based on the idea that gender is a complex interaction of social interactions, work interactions, activity, and perception. And one of the things I found is that it can be viewed as either a barrier or an opportunity to fostering gender equity, depending on how you look at it. There's related to here a website that, Taylor, I just click on this here?
Yes.
This is a recently launched website, which will hopefully open in a minute.
That's just a bit slow.
Okay. By the Government of Canada. And I thought this was absolutely unbelievable. So this is Science for Women. This is intended on putting out the idea of science for women. All of these images, community building, planning, music and art, design. An earlier version of this site actually had a woman on here as a fashion designer and model. Science in your day-to-day. So we have friendships, gymnastics, music. These are all typically things that were very often associated with women. We do not get any contrary imagery here. And that is a problem. So I mentioned that doing gender can be viewed as either a barrier or as an opportunity. So West and Zimmerman, I'm just going to read a quote that really grabbed me from their article, and that is, "We conceive gender as an emergent feature of social situations, both as an outcome and a rationale for various social arrangements, and as a means of legitimizing one of the most fundamental divisions in society." So based on that, work activities are, part of that interaction. They're part of the interaction that people face when doing gender. That's a massive barrier, because how do you get beyond deeply ingrained social interaction that has been going on for years? And it relates to, again, the work that was done on Hibernia, that highlighted what they call the ideological structures within the industry as the main reason why these things weren't getting any legs. The other thing related to this is that doing these sets of gender expressive behaviors don't just govern the interactions within the workplace, they also govern people's responses to them. And you end up in a vicious cycle, a pattern that becomes extremely difficult to break. So then we face the idea of doing gender as an opportunity. And this is an idea that I like much more than the idea of gender as a barrier. The idea of doing gender is what they call a anti-essentialist concept. And I apologize for the, diversion into Platonic theory. I'm a grad student as part of the report. And that is that gender is more than a set of attributes that are common to every man or woman. The idea that there are binary definitions about men and women doesn't play in this theory. There are wide ranges of women's responses, women's beliefs, women's behaviors. As they say, gender is multiple, fluid, and relational. One of the things that grabbed me about this, my husband was working in Blarney on the Hebron project. And he came home one day because he'd heard me yap about this for a very long time. And he relayed a conversation that he had with a young electrician that he was working with. A young woman. She was a journeyman electrician. And she was very frustrated that day. There had been a respectful workplace training. And she found it very isolating. She was constantly highlighted as the woman. She is the woman. And she said to my husband, I just want to be an electrician. I just want to do my job. Not every woman is going to feel that way. There's going to be a wide range of behaviors and level of comfort in that sort of environment. We can't peg all women as responding in a particular way to a particular set of behaviors. And that applies to responding in a particular way to a set of programs and policies. So that, I think, is one of the areas that needs to be worked on. Related to this is the idea that career choice is defined by emotions, social economic conditions, culture, gender, social context, and unexpected life events. So here we have very similar definitions relating to gender and career choice. Both are built out of the framework of our experiences. And when you consider these definitions, why do we consider these particular jobs to be masculine? So you've got this constant tug of war here between the two concepts. So doing gender and gender policy. As I've mentioned, the essentialist approach fails to consider gender variability. So if we do X, women will respond in this way. And that's not the case. Women will respond very, very differently. And then sometimes they will respond in unpredictable ways. This is anecdotal, but I was working on a diversity piece for Hebron in the very early stages of the project. And there was some discussion about women and where they would be lodged, I guess, on the platform. And someone had spoken up and said, well, we're part of the team out there. We're not necessarily going to want to share a room with a guy, but we don't want to be on the other side of the structure either. We don't want that physical separation. And that was surprising to some people. They wanted to be part of the team. And that relates to the idea that, women are, the women in this room, we hold a wide range of beliefs and understandings about what will work in this area. And there's no one fit. With this, this killed me when I read this. There is a potential to highlight what they call weak signifiers. When there's so much effort put into these programs and so much money and time put into these programs, there's a tendency to want to grab onto things that have been seen as success. There's an Australian toolkit for gender equity floating around out there, and there's actually a very strong criticism of it that I found. And in that article, or in that toolkit, they highlight the availability of pink hard hats as the success of the gender equity program. I really am not joking. This was highlighted. Personally, I hate pink. I know lots of women who hate pink. But this was, I read that and I almost fell off my chair. So what you have here sometimes is the unintentional reinforcement of gender norms. All women like pink. All women are going to want to be physically separated from the men because they're going to be afraid. And that doesn't work when you're dealing with the volume of women that you're trying to recruit. So the idea of gender display and scheduled behavior is another interesting one. I keep saying this is an interesting idea, but it's all interesting. That's why I'm here. Women in these positions are faced with some very, very difficult choices. A lot of the interactions in these occupations, as I mentioned, they're very masculine dominated. They're very male. There's a fraternal culture here. And you end up with what they call gender differentiated styles of interaction. And these communications are absent when women are involved. There was a study, the author's name was Friendsway, and it looked at women's experiences in the oil and gas industry in England, or UK I should say. And it noted that a lot of these, pats on the back and, physical displays of congratulations and handshaking, things like that, are absent when women are there. The mood is still respectful, but it's toned down. There's a woman in the room. We can't slap someone on the back. It's still respectful, but the nature of it changes. And when people are looking at someone to hire in these industries, they, whether implicitly or explicitly, they think of things like that. And they, what's a woman going to do to my team? Right? Those sort of things enter our consciousness, whether we realize it or not. Women end up in what is referred to in literature as a double bind, where you want to be, you're female. Your identity as a female, it's important to you. But if you act that way, you're going to be treated differently. You put on a show. And this is the performance element of doing gender. That, you're forced to be one of the boys. And if you're not, you're going to suffer for it. And the idea is that it's okay for a woman to be like that, as long as not too much like that. As long as the woman isn't too argumentative, which is quite frankly a word that has been used to describe me at times, which is, what they call agentic behaviors. Women, for example, in leadership positions, a woman who wants to be a leader, they're vocal, they're argumentative, they challenge the status quo. And she can't be a leader, she doesn't get along well with people, she's too vocal. And then you tone things down, you're a little calmer, you're a little softer. And then, she can't be a leader, she doesn't really have any leadership qualities. So, what do you do? Really, what do you do? No, that's what the double bind refers to. And this relates to the idea of gender equity as a problem of and for women. The whole idea that a lot of these things have to be put in place for women. And all of this is done for women. This relates to the idea of critical mass that I'm doing, that I'll talk about shortly. And one of the sources that I read referred to this as the further ghettoization of women, which I thought was a fairly intense phrase. And until we wrap our heads around the idea that this is not just a women's problem, this is an organizational problem. This is, these programs are to the benefit of the employer, they're for the benefit of the organization. It's not just because, well, we have to recruit more women. It can't just be for women. So related to all this is the idea again of the critical mass. One of the some of the literature I read refers to the Leaky Pipeline, where attrition in these fields negates gains related to recruitment. 52% of women in these occupations leave their occupation, typically in their early to mid-30s. The number of men on the team and the balance of men to women on the team in that ratio influences the likelihood of women to stay on that team. Where do women go? So you have a woman, they've been in the industry for 5-7 years. What do? They go to project management. They go to administration. They go to sectors where there are more women, where they're more comfortable. And that is really that's really part of the problem with challenging the status quo, is getting to that level where you have a cohort of women at that sort of intermediate senior level in these positions, because those are your mentors. Those are the people that are going to be out there to, the younger women who are coming in, the work term students or the first year engineering graduates, and they're the ones that are going to make them comfortable. When you lose that, especially the women who would be the next team leaders, the next managers, that is a massive problem. And some of the numbers are scary. There was an Australian study that in 2009 the study was completed, and it noted that in 1996, 18% of all engineering graduates were women. However, by 2006, just 11% of engineers with 7 to 10 years of experience were women. And that indicated that women were almost 40% more likely to leave than men. So we have two numbers, 40-50%. Those are substantial numbers. And the impact of that I don't think that can be underestimated. Excuse me. So we have, again, with critical mass, the idea of career fit confidence. Being alone in these industries can really influence your sense, I mentioned earlier, your sense of employability, how comfortable you are in these positions. I showed a Government of Canada's website earlier, and there's another one out there that is intending to drive women into these positions. You log on to the website, the first thing you see, women make up only 22% of this workforce. So basically the message is, you're going to be by yourself. You're going to be there. You're just only going to be one of you or two of you on this big group of men. And then there's, we're here for you. We're there to support you. You can go here for support. That's great, but all this support is external to the organization. It's when you have the opportunity for the support that is within the organization or within the industry that you will end up with real change. These messages of inequality can really discourage women. There was a study related to math, high school math, and women did better and were more likely to persist in studies related to math when the gender lines were blurred a bit, and it wasn't an us against them. Again, that's a study out of Australia. A lot of this literature does come out of Australia. Then we also end up with inclusive practices, which on their face, fantastic. The ability to work from home, extended maternity leave, work-life balance programs. Their very existence are indicators of change. They're important to have. One of the things I wanted to make sure I didn't do when I came here today, I didn't want to discount the value of what has been done so far. Because some very real organizational change has been made, and it is important. unfortunately, women become afraid to take advantage of them. They feel as though it puts a spotlight on them as a mother. I have an 8-year-old son. I've experienced this myself, where you feel this pull, because you're the mom. And I am probably the most, Mark's worked with me for a very long time, he can tell you. Multitasking, working all hours of the day. But when it comes to your child and your sense of what you're supposed to be doing as a mother, there's this pull. And I feel it, and I'm aware of these issues. I've worked on them for a very long time. So I can only imagine how pervasive they can be when that awareness is not there. So taking advantage of these programs, the ability to work from home when your child is sick, the ability to work from home when you're tired because you have an 8-year-old child. It's part of what they refer to as a rhetoric of intimidation. And it's scary. It can be difficult for women to take advantage of these programs. This goes back to why women tend to leave these positions at a certain time in their lives. They tend to leave in their early 30s, early to mid 30s, when a lot of these women their family responsibilities change. And it really affects how they feel about their sense of employability and their sense of inclusion in the workforce. And they're afraid that taking advantage of these policies can be limiting. I've witnessed this myself, where someone goes to their supervisor and a woman with a small child says, I'm sorry, I got to work from home today. My child is sick. I can't send her to daycare. And there's a big sigh. Man on the same team goes to the same supervisor. I'm sorry, I got to work from home. My little girl is sick. The wife got to go to work. God, boy, you're so good for you to do that. I've witnessed this. It happens. And the amount of anger you face when you see this, literally my head almost spun on his shoulders. So those sort of things need to change. One of the things that struck me from Bobby Boland's work in the mid-2000s, this is a great piece of work, but there's the availability of finding childcare in male-dominated positions as a barrier to women. That whole thing, I read that and it just kind of, What I'd like to see is that the availability of childcare is a barrier for families. It is not just a barrier for women. At the 2011 Oil and Gas Forum, there was a presentation from a vice president for Statoil, I believe, and she was very open about this. And part of the reason they've had so much success in Norway related to this is that a lot of these issues are considered phase of life issues. The ability to take maternity leave or parental leave is not a woman's issue that women face at a certain age. It is a family issue. It is a phase of life issue. And the society, the open and inclusive society that we live in right now, we are not just as likely, but quite likely to have a homosexual male couple have to take leave. Daycare is an issue for them as much as it is for the traditional family. So having that framed as just a barrier for women, it kind of got under my skin in a way. It actually took me a while to figure out why I was bothered by it. So again, the idea of critical mass is linked to gender performance. When you have more women in these positions, the idea of having to be one of the guys goes away, because the framework is different. You are just one of the team, and the team is composed of so many different people. Unfortunately, we are in a chicken and the egg problem, where one of the ways to fight a lack of critical mass is critical mass. So how do you address that? And one of the things that has been done, and it's not everybody's favorite word, and there are problems with it, is the idea of quotas. Again, I'll bring the example of Norway. In the mid-2000s, Norway developed what we call a hard law approach that women, a certain proportion of board of directors had to be female. And what they had done, it was a phased approach where the initial phase was what they call a soft law policy approach. And no one did anything during that phase. It was only when the actual, stick of potential company sanctions and penalties came on board that you ended up with actual change. And what happens is there is a substantial change in organizational dynamics, and they've discovered that the magic number is 3. If you have, say, a board of directors with 10 people, and you have one of them is a woman. So, they are the woman on the board. They are the token woman. They're there, probably ignored, probably, downplayed, the rhetorical pat on the head. When you have 2 women, they call it the conspiracy phase. These 2 women are, they're out to get us. When you have 3 women, the 30% mark, you have a shift where 3 women are going to represent different ideas, different backgrounds, different perceptions. They're going to bring that to the table. And when you get to that point, the shift is notable. And what happens is at that stage, things begin to trickle down throughout the organization. And a lot of the problems that I've noted before, they don't go away, but the organization becomes a little more adept at dealing with them. The ways forward. I can't emphasize this enough, I've mentioned it a few times, and that is the current situation does not diminish the value of diversity planning and existing effort. I worked on the Husky Energy Plan for a number of years. The energy and effort that they put into that plan is obvious. It's important to them. The implementation of it is important to them. They want their suppliers and contractors to be doing real things. They hold sessions with them to get them to understand what it is they want them to be doing. And I cannot overemphasize how important they are. However, what we need next is, and what I hope to do next, is a strategy to identify and address these barriers. And that effort is going to have to be broadly based, industry, educational, and government. It's going to require efforts from all of them. So thank you very much for your time. And the important part for me is to hear what you have to say, and so I can figure out what to do next. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dana. So we'll turn it over to you guys.